G'day, Tony here, and I hope you enjoyed the first video on our series of how to install Proxmox in a high availability cluster. This is the second of those series of videos, and in this video we're going to install Proxmox on our newly minted Debian install, as well as configure the high availability cluster. We'll also be setting up our storage. So without further ado, let's get started. We'll log into Proxmox as I have configured this as my first server in my Proxmox cluster. My IP address is 10.110.10.5. So I've already saved that setting in PuTTY. And now if I open it, and it appeared on the wrong screen. So here we are, prox, password. All right, the first thing we're going to do is I always like to use the super user. The reason being is because I have found that using sudo doesn't always work with the commands for installing Proxmox. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So I generally use the super user account for when I'm doing these settings. So the first thing what you need to do is check our host file. So we just run this command sudo, nano ect hosts, and in here we can see by default when we installed Debian, it's created a host for Prox1 on a loopback adapter. So what I'm going to do is change this 10.110.10.5. This is very important that you do this. Don't skip this step because it will cause grief. Now, one other thing it says to do in the documentation, I don't know why, is to create a host that's still set on loopback. So what I do is use prox1, and let me just get that set to the right indent, prox1.proxmox.local, and then proxmox1 as its alternate, and prox1. Now, when we get to the step where we are building our cluster, we will be changing this file again, because each of the machines will set them up so that they can easily see each other without having to look up, just in case you have a problem with the internet or whatever, particularly if you're not using, you're not publicly facing these devices. You want to be able to quickly have them browsable for each other. This will make more sense later on when we get to installing it. But for now, that's all we need to do. So Control X, get out of that. Our next step. Now this is very, very important. We don't want to miss this. We just need to make sure that if in our host name file, that one of the names, so if you remember from when we were setting up the previous step, there was an ident called Proxmox. We could also make this proxmox.fitzsimmons, and that would also work. But Proxmox1 works fine as long as in this file there is a matching entity in both the hosts and host name file. All right. So next. Really want to make sure that everything is reachable, so I just ping prox1. Yep, it's resolving the right IP address. Control C. Control C. You might get the keyboard to work. Control C. That's there we are. Ping prox1.fitzsimmons. Oh, try again. If I get the spelling correctly. I'm trying to do this too fast. That's what the problem is. All right, great. So this is really important that you do this, because if you don't have either the fully qualified domain name or just the host name resolvable to the IP address, not just localhost, then you'll have problems with installation of Proxmox. And the only way to recover from it, if you have a failed installation, is start right from scratch. Sorry. There's no other way around it, because if you try and reinstall Proxmox again on top of a failed install, it's still not going to work. Someone else out there may be more experienced with Linux and can figure out how to do it, but it's well beyond the scope of my skills. So I've I've quite literally been through this about 50 times. I'm not kidding. So this is what I suggest you do. Just make sure that it's resolvable to the domain name, and then we're good to go. So on to the next step. So we just do a quick make sure that our repositories are up to date. Now you can at this point reboot your machine if you wish. I'm not going to. I'm satisfied that because it didn't actually update anything, I don't need to worry about it. So next thing we need to do is we need to install GNUPG2 so that we can import the GBG key. So we just install that. All right. And next we'll import our GPG key. All right, we should get an OK response. Great. And next we're going to import our repository. All of this is on my website, by the way. Okay, that's the correct response. And now we will pull our repo down. So we copy this. And away it goes to do that. All right. I'm going to speed this up till we get to the part where we're next got to do stuff. Okay, now we need to add our cipher to the repository. And we should get that response, that's correct. And finally, we do the install. Yes. Okay, so what you can see here is Proxmox installer is asking if we want to modify our Win setting. Because we've set up our host names correctly, we don't need to do this. And I should point out that even if you don't set up your host name and you do set up using this approach, it doesn't work. So don't do it. All right, now generally, I mean, if you understand or have a specific set of configuration that you want to do that applies here, and you've gone off and done your own research, then go by all means follow whatever approach works best for your environment. But for me, and probably 99% of other people who are watching this video, local only is the right process. This is important too. Now, the reason when we set up our host file, we made sure that it was qualifying to my full domain name is because when we do the installation of Proxmox, it will create a certificate. So, or at least I believe that's what it does. So we've created a fully qualified domain. Now, if you don't have a domain, you could use, say, for example, proxmox.local, for example. And that would be a local domain. You don't have to register it. It works only from within inside your boundary, your network boundary. That will also work. But for me, I have a domain. I'm never going to publish this to the world. It's only internally, but I've got a domain. I might as well use it. All right, so I'll pause the video until this is completed, and then we should be right to go with the final steps of configuring Proxmox. Okay, so our setup is now complete. Last step is we do a reboot. And once the reboot is finished, if you look at the screen on your laptop or your PC, whatever you're installing this on, you'll see it comes up with a message that says, gives you the path to install, or sorry, gives you the path to load the web page of Proxmox. So when this is rebooted, I'll come back and show you what that looks like. You can see on the screen grab that it's telling us to load 10.110.10.5:8006. Now you can see that I've opened that page. It's given me a certificate error. If I hit advance and proceed, this will then open up Proxmox, and we can log in with our root user. Our other user won't work, so don't use Prox. So when you set up the root user in Debian, you're going to use that user now. Now, first thing we're going to do now is get rid of this nag screen that you can see, as well as do a couple of other tweaks. So there's a couple of approaches we can use to do this. So within the Proxmox server itself, from the Proxmox node, we can shell directly in here. Now, this is the same as logging in with PuTTY and then going su space minus. What we're going to do first is change the repository that is used by Proxmox. Now, this was one we actually set up when we were doing the install, but if you don't do it this way around, the install will fail. Hit enter. Okay. So then we do an update. All right, it doesn't take too long to do that. Next, we're going to edit and add this command. Again, this is all on my website, and we update again. All right. Now, next thing we're going to do is remove the annoying nag screen. So to show you what I'm talking about, if I log out and then log back in again, we get this nag screen here. So all we need to do is add this command, which it edits one of the files within the Proxmox system to get rid of this subscription. Now this changes from time to time. So when you're doing this command, if it doesn't work, please don't yell at me. You just need to go and do some research yourself to find out what the new command is to remove the nag screen. All right, so that takes a second or two and the connection closes. If we log back out and then log back in again, bingo, no more nag screen. Okay, now time to set up clustering on our Proxmox environment. But first, let me just quickly explain to you how clustering and high availability works within a Proxmox environment. You may be wondering why I chose to set up 3 machines rather than just use 2. I mean, surely if we could just mirror our setup, then why wouldn't that work? Well, the reality is within Proxmox, the way it works is it needs a quorum. And each machine gets 1 vote. And they decide between themselves which one is going to be the master and which one's going to be the slave. If you've only got 2 machines, then the vote is always going to be a tie. So you need a 3rd machine or an odd numbered machine as a tiebreak. That's much the same as what you do in Parliament or in Congress or whatever. You have a quorum to decide how to vote. It has to be an odd number. It can't be an even number because otherwise you get a deadlock. So that's the reason we've got 3 machines. Now when you're building Proxmox clusters in a production environment, that's sort of the rule of thumb. You have to use odd numbered server counts. You could also use something called a QDisk. Now, a QDisk is just simply a Proxmox installation with no machines running on it. Now, I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out whether it was worthwhile building a QDisk, and there isn't really much information on how to do that with the current versions of Proxmox. That's the reason I decided to go this direction. But by all means, you're welcome to try for yourself if you would rather just use a Raspberry Pi, because I've heard that that's possible. You could use a Raspberry Pi as a QDisk and just have 2 machines as your Proxmox cluster. But without blabbering on anymore, let's get on with how we get our cluster built. So you can see here now I have my 3 machines stood up. The first thing we need to do is we need to go into each machine, go into the shell, and then we need to change the configuration of each of the networking settings. And in our host file, we're going to add entries for each of our servers. So we can see here the first server we've got is 10.5, which is Proxmox 1. Now, if I paste in here some settings that I've already created, I'll get rid of the first line because I don't need that. This is on my website, these settings. But if you're building obviously your own version with your own domain name, you wouldn't use mine. Unless you want to. I mean, I'm not going to stop you. But there we go. So we just need to make sure that on each machine we have the same setup. So again, we go into our machine, edit the hosts file, and then we add our line of code. Actually, be quicker to do it from here. Grab that, copy, move our cursor to the bottom line, hit paste, and now I'll just get rid of that line there. And there we go. Okay, and then we do the same thing on our third machine. With the node, shell, paste in there. Grab this. All right. So we just make sure we get out of all our settings in each machine. Control X. Yes. All right. Now the last thing we need to do is make sure that the ping works for each node. Prox 2. Yep. Control C. Prox 3. Yep. Control C. And go on to node 2. Ping prox 1. Yep. Prox 3. Yep. And then of course on prox 3 we do the same thing. Prox 1. Yep. Prox 2. Beautiful. Awesome. All right, so all of my machines can now easily see each other without needing a DNS server. Now, by the way, later on we'll be setting up Pi-hole, and I'll show you how to configure that as an inside DNS server for your environment, because that's one of the things I use here. Okay, so setting up our clustering. First place we need to do is we need to set up our master node. So we go into the, I'm going to choose this just for no other reason than it's the first node of the Proxmox server. So Prox 1, and I'm going to create this and make this the node, the master node. So we just hit create cluster, give it a node. So something boring and predictable, Proxmox cluster. We need to tell it which interface to use. Now this gives you the option, if you wished to, or if you had the capability to, you could use an alternate NIC to be your interface between each machine, and that way you could make it possible so that all the traffic that for synchronizing between each Proxmox server goes over a dedicated internet, goes over a dedicated NIC. It might even be possible to use the Wi-Fi LAN if you can figure out how to do that. I haven't been able to do that. If I figure it out, I will post a subsequent video on how to change that. For the time being, we're just going to use the one and only NIC that's in each of these machines because they're laptops. And in this case, the IP address is 10.5. So I hit create, and we'll see here that the task is okay, and that's completed. So now what I need to do is join. So all I need to do is click on the join information, copy information, go to my next machine, into data center, cluster, join cluster, paste, make sure that the IP address for the peer is correct. My IP address in, that's all good, join. Now what you'll see happen is the machine will reboot. You'll see that what will happen in due course is when I go back to here, in fact you can see that there now, that the second cluster has appeared. Now we'll go and do the same thing on this node. Cluster, join, paste, put the password in. Join. Great. So because the other machine is joining, this is going to take a minute. So, but what you'll end up seeing is that it doesn't matter which user interface, which server you hit, the desktop is going to be the same. The dashboard, I should say, is going to be the same. It's going to tell you the same set of nodes, 1, 2, 3. And if you had machines built, which is the next step we're going to do, you will see those machines on whatever servers they're installed on. Now, once this is completed here, this will say it's going to take a little while for it to finish replicating because it has to synchronize the database, etc. But once it's completed, you'll see that this same menu appears on all 3 servers. Okay, so the next step, we're going to set up our disks. So our servers have all finished replicating. You can see here from node 1, if I click on node 1, I can go and browse to each of the nodes within my environment. The same thing, just to show you what I was trying to explain rather clumsily, what I was trying to say about the desktop, or the dashboard, I did it again, being the same on each machine. I've logged here into node 2, and you can see here it's got all 3 nodes visible. Same applies on node 3. So it doesn't really matter from now on which of the nodes that you log into, you will actually be able to see the resources for each node. And just a note here to show you that when you look at the summary of the data center in total, once synchronization is finished, it will show you all the resources available for all of the nodes. So if you, just to show you what I'm trying to say here, if I go on to node 1, it's showing me here on the summary page the amount of RAM available, the amount of hard drive space available, and the number of CPUs available. Same applies to node 3 or node 2. It's still trying to replicate, so it's running a little bit slowly, but once the replication is finished, it actually performs quite well. I should also point out, because I know someone's going to make the observation, I haven't masked out the GUID when I used the join cluster, because after this video is finished, I'm rebuilding the whole thing again. So you don't need to worry about my security. I'm not worried about you figuring out how to way and hack into my my Proxmox cluster, because it's been completely destroyed by the time you get to watch this video. So there you go. Anyway, just thought I'd make that note. Now, let's move on to setting up our storage. Now, just some observations here, because I know some folks are probably going to make comment about it. In a normal production type environment, you would use a mirrored disk or some other RAID level control. Now, obviously, with this scenario here, I'm only using really cheap, crappy USB drives. I've only got 1 on each machine, so I'm not setting up any kind of redundancy on those mirrored drives, or not setting up any mirroring at all. Now, if I got some more cache available in the future, I will probably upgrade those to something a little more sophisticated, buy some bigger and more production type drives, because these USB drives are prone to failure. But for the time being, it serves my purposes, and I'm using the multi-nodes as the redundancy for my solution. So that's just a note that when you're building it yourself, you may choose to add more disks onto each of your nodes. You can mirror them. If you've got 5 disks, you could build a RAID 5 or whatever you know. You can do your own research on that. But to get disks set up, first we just go into our first node and we go to disk, and we just make sure that our disks are available. And this is the one that we're using, this expansion. It's currently saying that it's got an unknown smart. Don't worry about that for the moment. And what we need to do is go to ZFS, create ZFS, and this is really important. You must make sure that each of your nodes have exactly the same name. So in my case, I'm making it very complicated. I'm going to use the name data. Now, if I had more than 1 disk available in this particular environment, I could select all of them and then I could go mirror, RAID 10, RAID Z, RAID Z2, etc, etc, etc. But as I said, I'm only using single disks. I could also compress them if I wanted to. And that's all I need to do for now. Now, in the next part is we need to make sure this is turned off in our next disk. So this is the first of our ZFS partition. So we hit create. That'll take a second to do its thing, and then we'll set up the second one. So now that's finished, we can see that it's appeared here. Now if I click on expanding out here, we can see here that I now have data appearing in my storage pool. Just to show you, the other two nodes don't have any data storage. Now I'll go and do the same thing on node 2. So go to node 2. I could have done it from the other window, silly me. Go to node 2, hit ZFS, create ZFS. Now, just to note, it is case sensitive. So we turn that add storage off. We only need to put the add storage on for the first of the nodes. So we've already done that. So we turn it off for all the subsequent ones. Everything else is the same. Hit create. Now the way this works is with the high availability cluster, when you're creating these ZFS partitions, this is how Proxmox knows where to send the VMs when it's moving them around between the nodes. So let's do the third one. Again, go to disks just to make sure that the disk's there. Yes, ZFS, create ZFS, data, turn off add storage, click on that, hit create. And that's it. We now have created all of our storage, so we can set up our high availability for our storage. So now what we need to do is go to Data Center, click on Storage, and we can see here our ZFS partition. We hit Edit, and now what we need to do is select all of our 3 servers, hit OK, and now we'll find that the data storage is being replicated across to each server. That way, when we build our machines, which will be in the next video, we will be able to tell Proxmox which pairs to use as high availability. So until next time, thanks for watching.